All right, folks, welcome to class. It is Wednesday, February 27th, and we are today starting UserForms, creating custom dialog boxes with UserForms. So there's a file to download here. It turns out this is not the file I meant for you to download, but it's the one we downloaded last class. So it'll work okay for us, but it's not. It just has some of the solution of what we're building today kind of already built into it. So maybe you can kind of sit back and relax a little more today in class because you've got the answers already. Okay, so this is data we've looked at before. So if you remember, it's like product data from some kind of outdoor store. So we've got, what are we selling? Like duck calls. Here's the custom brass banded spec clear. That's kind of a weird name for a product, but it's from a manufacturer called Cut Down Calls. It's in the hunting department, and the category is duck acrylic. There we go. There's an image, a description, and so forth. So what our goal here today now is to introduce something entirely new. It's totally different than what we've done so far in VBA. To this point, everything we've done in VBA has been, all right, let's make some kind of procedure. Maybe it's a function procedure or a sub-procedure, but the user's going to do something that says, run this code. And it's just, code. But now we're going to have another element, and that is we're creating a form. There's going to be a graphical interface that the user works with, and we've got to be able to code that interface to be able to collect the information from the user and do stuff with it. So it's really different. So far, everything we've written has been inside what I will now differentiate as a general module. It turns out the only place we can write code that gets saved as part of our workbook is in a module. It has to be in some kind of module. So I've always just called it a module, but every module we've created so far has been a general module. Today, we're going to work with a different kind of a module that's built into a thing called a user form, and here's how we create one of those. I'm going to come to the Insert menu, and instead of choosing module, I'm going to choose user form. And that will create a form. This has this graphical user interface. I'll make it a little bit bigger, just resize it here. Now, it turns out this graphical interface, this user form, has a module built into it as well. So we're going to get to that. So we will be still working in a module, but it's not a general module. It's a form module. And so things are a little bit different as we get here. So let's just go ahead and talk about the properties of this form right now. So with this form selected, I've got my properties window over here, and it shows me some of the properties. It's most of the properties, actually, all the properties that I can change at design time. So while I'm building it, there's properties I can change. There's some properties that are only available at runtime. They don't show here, but there's very, very few of those. So we won't have to worry about them at all. So the first one I'm going to do is change the name. We're going to be very careful about giving all these objects that we create, and we will create lots of objects as we're working with user forms. We're going to give them names. So this one I'm going to call FRM prod. So we're going to be using this for showing our products, and so I'll just call it FRM prod. It is like kind of like tradition or custom or a best practice for us to say when we start dealing with all the objects that are in this form, there's so many of them, and so many of them have names we would like to have the same name. For instance, we're going to have a label that shows the price, and we're going to have a text box that shows the price. Price would be a great name for both of those, and so we're going to prefix everything with 3 characters that lets us have some sense about what kind of object it is. And so since this is a form, I'm going to put 3 characters in front of it to tell me it's a form, FRM. And then prod will just be something to know it's the product form. Now, you might think because we changed that from user form 1 to prod that when I leave that, it would change what's up here in the title bar, but it's not. What's showing in the title bar of the form is the caption property. It happens to be the same thing as the default name of the form, but I'm going to come with my form selected, I'm going to come to where it says caption, and I will change that from user form 1 to be maybe product, I'll call this edit product data. And that will I'm just changing a property. And we can see that, remember, property is just a value that describes how the object is. And so I'm changing the way this object is, specifically what it shows in its title bar. Okay, and so we could change a few more properties of the form, but the rest of the defaults are going to be fine for what we're doing. Now, we're going to add other objects onto the form. And these are in the toolbox. Now, your toolbox may not be showing, and so I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to close this one so I can show you how to open it. So if you ever get to a user form, your toolbox is nowhere to be seen, what can you do? Well, right up here on your little toolbar, there's one tool here that looks to me vaguely communist. It's got a hammer crossed with a wrench, and I'm always a little nervous to click on it, but all it does is bring up that toolbox. So that will get your tools back open. And now all of these are tools that we can use to actually put onto this form to control the way the user interacts with it. In fact, let me, in case I forget, which I probably will, notice that if you right-click this, there's additional controls. And so the ones that you see here are like the ones that are built-in standard. You've got lots of other ones that are available to you that just kind of come with Windows, and then some that come just depending on whatever else you might have installed on your computer. And so if I choose additional controls, we're going to see there are additional controls, not a few. So the ones that we're going to see here in class are kind of just getting us started. One of them, of interesting, is a Microsoft web browser. You can actually put a whole web browser onto your form, drop it in, and it's a functioning web browser. It's like based on Internet Explorer, so it's not a very good web browser, but it's there and it works. So that's the idea, is that some of these controls are really, really advanced, and they'll do kind of really specific things. I'm not going to add that one in here, but that's just to show, hey, there are more than what we see right here. So let's look at we're going to get familiar with several of these controls today. I want to start off with this one, the command button. So the command button, we've done buttons before, but we've put them right onto a user, or right onto on a worksheet. But here I'm going to just bring this onto my form. There's a couple ways I can do it. I can just like click and drag the button in, or I can select the tool and then click and drag to draw the size. Either way, it gets me to the button. But then it creates a button here on my form. Let's go ahead and change a couple of the properties of this button. So name, instead of command button 1, I'm going to use a 3-letter prefix again, CMD, short for command button. It turns out there's other kind of buttons. There's option buttons and toggle buttons, and this is a command button, so we'll use CMD. And I'm going to call this OK. I'll also change the caption on this one to just read OK. And where we're headed with this form is that I'd like to have a way to be able to edit the data for a particular product. I mean, if I come back here to Excel and I look at this, if my job is to edit the data about products, Excel's not really designed for this very well. Because as I'm editing a particular product, all the information I need, now I've got this whole huge screen, and now I'm limiting myself to one band that goes across it. Everything else is irrelevant to the current problem of setting that, changing that particular product. And in fact, the screen there's so much data here, I can't even see it all at once. And so our goal here with this user form is to say, I want to be able to make this user form so when the user opens it, it just takes all the data for the current product that we're on and shows it in a more well-organized place. I can see all the data. Maybe I'll be able to also put some data validation onto it. So if the user types in something that I think, that doesn't make sense. You put a negative price in for or a negative value for the price. Or maybe you put something that was non-numeric for the price, and I want to make sure that I'm not going to let you do that. And so that is, the user form will help us to do that. So that's where we're headed here. All right. So now I think we're ready to show this form. There's a couple ways that I can show the form. Let's look at the first way that's really just for development. And that is, while the form is active, I can click on the play button, and that will just show the form. Here's my great form. I got an OK button, and so I'll just click that, and that should close the form, yeah? Wait, how come that doesn't close the form? Yeah, all I've done is said, hey, put a button here that says OK. I haven't told it what to do. It's not going to guess and say, it's an OK button. Probably want to put some code in here to close the form. No. You've got to put the form in to tell it. You've got to put the data to tell it what to do. So I'm going to come here and just going to close the form by this X, which will close the form regardless of what else is on it. That's one way to do it. Let me show you how you can show this form through code. So I think we already have a module here. So if I come to modules, we probably have a module 1. Here's module 1. This is actually an example that we had done earlier where we made this code to make unique lists of unique data points in our data. You may remember this, but we said, hey, we got a whole bunch of departments here. I'd like to find out just what the unique list of departments is. And so we've got that up here, like in column D. So this is just kind of built up from that example. So let's just make one here. I'll make a subprocedure called edit product. And now this sub procedure is just going to show the form. The name of my form, what was the name of the form I'm creating? FRM prod. It has a method called show. And so now when I execute this sub procedure, that will also show the form. We think, well, big deal. I either hit play on the sub procedure or I hit play on the form. It's the same thing. But now that I've got a sub procedure with that, I can, and because it's a sub procedure that has no parameters, I should be able to put a hotkey on it. So let me come to my developer tab and see my list of macros. And here's edit product. I'll choose options. I'll put a capital E in there. So now this will be, I guess I'll put the description, show the edit product form. So now when I'm on my workbook, I can press Control-Shift-E, and that should also bring up the form. Now, ultimately, I would like to have something up here in my ribbon that's just a button the user can, select. Maybe I've got a whole tab for Edna in accounting and the stuff that Edna is going to work with, and one of those buttons is just going to open up the product edit form. And I will teach you how to do that in this class, but that's not for today. So we'll get by just with a shortcut for today. So, questions? Okay, yeah. The question is, are shortcuts and tabs, meaning something up here in the ribbon, the preferred way to do that instead of just adding buttons? And the answer is, for me, yes. It's much preferred. But in general, it's either of those two is a better approach than adding a button here, because what Edna is going to do is she's going to be down here editing one of these products, and she's going to go, I got to change this product. Where would you put the button? Oh, yeah, okay, so we could have a frozen part at the top. That wouldn't be so bad. That'd be okay. But here's the other problem with buttons is that I have had experience where buttons have come disconnected from the code that they're supposed to trigger. And it happens on occasion when you rename the workbook. So I change this workbook to a new name, and even though those buttons are supposed to stay connected, I've had them lose their connection to their button because oh, wait, I'm looking for this macro in some other workbook because it's gotten confused by the name. So I actually prefer to avoid buttons whenever possible. Okay. Now, in UserForms, there is now a very, very different way that we have to think about code. So far, all the code we've written has been, I've written this code, and now the user's going to run it, either by pressing a shortcut key or clicking on a button or going from the list and choosing it or calling the function from a cell or something, giving the user some way to get at that. There's now a new and very different way to get code to execute. The first thing is that as I'm writing the code for this user form, instead of writing one long sub-procedure that does what I want it to do, I'm going to write maybe dozens of small sub-procedures, each of which does a small part of what I'm trying to accomplish. And now the way those different sub-procedures get activated is really different. Let's take a look. So here, I am going to, first of all, tell it I would like to put some code behind this button. Now, when we put a button onto a worksheet, we right-click it and say assign macro. That's not the case now. Instead, I'm going to double-click the button while I'm in design mode here on the form, double-click, and that is going to open up the code module that's built into the form. If I look up here in the title bar, I will see I am on the code for my object form product. Code that is on the inside of the module has more features. So first thing, we've ignored these drop-down boxes are on every module we've worked with so far. They are utterly uninteresting until we get to a more advanced object like a user form. Now, if I drop down this one, it's going to show me the list of all of the objects I have on the form. Here, there's only two. There's the form itself, which is an object, and then there's this command button, which is an object. By the way, all of these buttons that I see, or all these objects that I see that I can put onto a form, these objects have a word that describes the kinds of objects you put onto forms are called controls. It seems like a weird word to say, but now I have said it for so long, it almost seems normal. But those objects are called controls. They're like you think of as the dials, the controls that you might put, on the front of some machine. These are the controls that you would put onto the form that allow the user to interact with it. And so I have, when I'm double-click this button, this combo box now shows me the form itself and every control that is there. And so it's not enough to know which object I want to attach the code to. I have to know which event I want the code to respond to. And so now for the code to respond to this button, it takes the combination of an object and an event. And so with my CMD OK object selected here, this combo box will show me all of the relevant events. Now, when I double-clicked that button, it guessed. It said, you probably want to write some code here. I'm going to guess that you want to write, it's a button after all, that you want to write code that responds to this button receiving the click event. And so it's already generated this sub-procedure. And this literally, there's nothing magic here. This sub-procedure, because it has a name, that is the name of an object, underscore, the name of an event, this is an event sub-procedure. It is a sub-procedure that the user doesn't have to call. It will happen automatically when that particular object, CMD OK, receives that particular event, click. So let's just go ahead and close the form. There's a couple different ways to close the form, depending on how harsh you want to close it. You can close it so it's still in memory but just hidden, or you can close it so it's completely just dumped out of memory altogether, which is what we'll do. I'm just going to say unload, and then the name of the form. What's the name of the form? FRM prod. So now I should be able to run this, and when I click on the button, it should now close the form. And it brings me back into design mode. I just said unload form. Takes it off the screen, takes it out of memory. It's completely wiped it away. Unload removes the object from memory. And since it's taken out of memory, it can't be on the screen anymore. So that's what unload does. Now, it turns out that if I've got code inside the form that's referring to the form by name, that's a little bit annoying because it seems like a normal thing to want to change the name of the form. I might copy this form to another project, and in that project I want it to have a different name. And so they've given us a little alias to refer to the form that has the code that we're running. And so instead of referring to the form by name, I will more likely come in here and use the alias me. Me just means the form that contains the code that's currently executing. So that way, if I change the name of the form, I don't have to worry about changing all the references to the form that might be inside my code. So it is preferred to use the form's alias to refer to it rather than its actual name. But the name works fine. It really is just a reference to the object. Is there a question? Yes? Is there a way to get this screen without double-clicking on the button? The answer is yes. When I'm on the form right here, I've got two little buttons right over here that say allow me to show the code or to show the form for the code that I'm currently working on. I worked with VBA for 20 years before I ever noticed that button. Is that right, 20 years? Probably not quite 20 years, more like 17 years or so. I don't know if they made it new or if I just never noticed it. Could be either way. So yeah, you can toggle back and forth that way. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is I really want to drive home the point that it is when an object receives an event that makes the code execute. And so here's what we're going to do. I'm still going to be writing code for the OK button, but instead of click, I'm going to choose a different one. What do I have to choose from? Like double click, enter. So that would be like if someone just tabs to it when that gets the focus. When it leaves the focus, if that's the active button and the user presses a key down or presses a key up, or, oh, how about this one? Mouse move. Oh, I like this one. So this event sub-procedure will execute whenever the command OK button receives the mouse move event. What's the mouse move event? It's when the mouse moves even a single pixel while it's over that button. So let's just do something. I mean, we don't want to unload the form when we do that. We'll do something different. Let's do this. Let's change one of the properties of the button. So my button is CMD OK. I'm going to change the left property of it. What is it going to be? It's going to be a random number, RND, random number between 1 and 0, times the how wide my form is. So me.inside width. So if my inside width is like 200 units, and they're not pixels, it's a different unit. If it's 200 units, and I have a random number between 1 and 0 and 1, then I'm going to get a random proportion of somewhere between 0 and the full width of my of my form. So now I should be able to run this, and if I click on that button, it's going to close, but a different event is going to happen first. And when I tried it, when the mouse move happens to that button, oh, now look at what happened here. It moved, but where did it move? Yeah, the mouse didn't move, but it happened to move to a place where the mouse was. Ah, I'm really lucky because now I can click on it. But otherwise, you know, it might take me a while to actually get to that button. Oh, and here actually it's kind of moved off of the screen a little bit. That's kind of a little bit rude. But that's because I'm setting the left property to be somewhere between 0 and however wide this form is. So let's make just one other adjustment on that. And so let's make it a random proportion of the width of the form minus the width of the button. So then that will, you know, it's going to take off the width of the button as far as where the left is allowed to go. So minus cmdok.width, and that will prevent it from going off of the form. So that'll be a little bit nicer. And let's do one more thing while we're on this button. Oh yeah, that would be a problem. Thank you. Minus. Okay, let's do one more thing. So I've got my command button here is currently selected. If it's not selected, you can select it without actually going back to the form just by picking it off this drop-down list. But there's another property here that might get really handy for us called default. The default property is a Boolean property, and if I set it to true, then this becomes the default button for the form. Meaning, if the user is working on this form and presses enter, it will be equivalent to the user clicking on that button. I've just made it the default button. User clicks, hits enter, it's the same as clicking. So since it might be a little more difficult for me to click on this now, I'm going to go ahead and put that in there. You know what? Let's not just limit it to changing the left position. Let's also change the top to be a random portion of the inside height minus the button's height. Height. Oops. So now, when I run this, it'll move to a random place both vertically and horizontally. But it shouldn't ever bounce all the way off the screen because I've essentially made a portion of this form along the side and the bottom that are not being calculated for where to put the left and the top of this particular button. Oh, so that's delightful. It's a fun game. You can while away the hours. Yeah, that's right. I'm going to close that. Hey, wait, go close that thing. Oh, did I tell you what happened once in the late 90s? I was a student teacher at the University of Minnesota. I was teaching an MBA class, probably how to use Microsoft Access or something. And oh yeah, it was because the databases my students were working with were just a little bit too large to fit on a floppy diskette. You don't know what floppy diskettes are, but that's how we used to move files around before we had flash drives. And it didn't hold very much, 1.4 megabytes. And so I said to the students, hey, if your database isn't fitting, databases compress really well, just compress it. And about half the class looked at me like they had no idea what I was talking about. Well, at the time, compressing a file or a folder wasn't part of the operating system. You had to download another piece of software. So there was WinZip was a pretty popular one at the time that you could use. PKZip was the first one that was really popular. And so I said, oh, just got to get WinZip. And they were like, oh, where do you get WinZip? And I was like, I don't know. And a student said, oh, you can just get it from shareware.com. I thought, that's great, shareware.com. I typed in shareware.com, but I misspelled it. And it took me to a hardcore pornography site. You don't have to worry about that at BYU because they've got filters that won't let you do that by mistake or on purpose. But at the University of Minnesota, anything goes. And these were pictures that I was blushing. I was about the color of my robe, actually, I think. And I was like, oh, go back. No, you go back, and it came right back. Close the browser. No, you can't close the browser. Close the browser, just came right back. The students thought it was the funniest thing they'd ever seen. I'm up here, a student myself, thinking I'm going to get fired or whatever. I finally just pulled the power plug out on the computer. Okay. I thought it was a gas. Okay, so we don't have to worry about that kind of stuff here. Why did I even say that? Something led me into that discussion. I don't remember what it was. Okay. So, let's do one more thing and then we'll move on. And that is, I'm going to do a little more of a joke here for Edna when she opens this. And that is, I'm going to write it in code, and I want you to see if you can figure out what this code is doing. And you'll kind of get why it's neat as we do it. So I'm going to do one more thing here, and that is cmd OK equals so look at that code, understand it for a moment, and then appreciate what's going to happen to Edna when she uses this. You see what it's going to do? Yeah, every time that button moves, it's going to shrink just a little bit. Just a little bit. It's only 2 units, and units are pretty small. I think the units are called TWIPs. So Edna's going to be trying to get that button, and right about now, she's going to say, "Is that button? That button is getting smaller every time. Oh no! How am I going to get it? Oh no! I gotta click right when I get to it. Oh no! Wait a minute. This is my lucky chance. Oh no! Wait, maybe this one. No. Oh no! It's just gone. Can I click it? But I don't need to because it's the default button. I can press enter and that'll trigger it still. So, and we'll do one more thing here that will make Edna love us all the more. And that is if the month of now is equal to 4 and the day of now is equal to 1, then okay, what did I just do? Oh, not 2, sorry. Yeah, you didn't have enough fun on April Fool's Day. So yeah, this code now will only be active on April Fool's Day. And so, I could be long gone by the time this code all of a sudden starts to behave this way. The real reason I put this on here is I would kind of like that button to behave normally today. And we probably won't actually come back to an April Fool's Day, but there we go. Reminds me when I was on my mission, I served in the office for a time. And we had a couple of, we had a couple missionary there that was the office couple. And they were kind of scared of the computer. They used it, but they were very leery of this computer. And so I wrote some kind of a batch file. It was in the days of DOS. So it put some kind of crazy message that was like, oh no, hard disk data failure imminent. Place keyboard on top of monitor to allow positive reionization or something. So I'm in the corner, they turn the computer on. They're reading this, they don't know what to do. Put the keyboard up on top of the monitor. And then it was, whew, darn near fatal avoided. Continue with your work or something like that. And I actually made it so it deleted itself after it ran once, so they brought it back to, look what happened when I turned the computer on. Nothing, just act normal, whatever. So, oh, good times. Okay. So, all right, but the whole point is to get this, that we're now in a different world. We're in the world of objects and events. We have talked about objects having properties and methods. Objects also have events. They can have events, in which case, when that object receives the event, it just triggers code that we have written. And so everything that we use in forms is going to live and breathe by objects and events, because we've got to figure out, that's how we tell to run the little snippet of code that's behind that particular object and event combination. But user forms are not the only place that we see objects and events. Let me show you another place. So let's come to this workbook. Actually, let's come to data, the data page itself. I'm going to double click that one. And it turns out that each one of these objects, each worksheet as well as the workbook, has a module built into it as well. There's a module that's just for that code. We have stayed away from these. Some of you have accidentally written code in here and you wonder, how come this isn't working the way it's supposed to work? And that's because there's different rules about the modules that are here. So you'll notice here that I'm on the worksheet, the module for this worksheet. So it has only one object here, the worksheet. And the default event is selection change. This code, there's a bunch of them here, but this code will execute every time the selection is changed on the worksheet. You want to be annoying? Message box. Congratulations. Congratulations. Did I spell that right? You just, J-U-S-T, selected. You'll notice it's passing in a range. It's passing in a target. And so that's actually the range, that's a reference to the range that's getting selected. You just selected target, T-A-R-G-E-T, dot address. Okay, so when this worksheet, which worksheet? The one we're on here, data, receives a selection change event, it's going to run this code. Congratulations, you just selected B84. Oh, that's my lucky day. Congratulations, you just selected. This would get really annoying. But the point is, when this sheet receives that event, it triggers that code. And there really are lots of different events that we can do on the worksheet itself. I definitely do not want to leave this code active. But apparently, oh, I got the message box up. Yeah, I think I probably could have stopped it, and that would have killed it as well. Let's do one more thing, and then we won't put anything here. If I come to the workbook itself, because this one's really handy, I come to workbook, and there's an open event. So I can say, when this workbook opens, run this code. So that's pretty slick. There's workbook close, or before, I think it's called, before close or query close or something. What is it? Before close. So so when the workbook's in the process of closing, before it closes, you can, oh, here, let's do this one. while we're playing, while we're having fun here. Before close has a cancel property. So depending on whatever logic you have here, you can prevent it from closing. All you have to do is set cancel equal to true. Cancel equals true. Now, you would probably do this, behind some kind of logic. Are you sure? Oh, no, I'm not really sure. And then, set cancel to true. But now that that's true, I got to close this workbook? No, it won't close. Because it's triggering that code that says, oh, we're getting ready to close. And what did you say? Cancel the close. Set the cancel to true. So this is not closable. Is there any way to close this workbook? I think I'd have to just kill Excel. That would close it. Control delete. Yeah, Control delete would get me into operating system level where I could say terminate Excel. But I mean, if I choose file close here, same thing. File close. File exit out of Excel altogether. Is there exit? How do I do it? How do I exit? I don't even know how to exit anymore. But yeah, it's really saying just stop the process. I could actually, through code, I could tell Excel to quit responding to all events, and then it would allow me to close. But there'd be a way around. There's a question over here. Yeah. So the question is, when these things that run automatically, these events that trigger, we can only do these on some of these special modules. That's exactly right. So if I come over here to our general module, module 1 here, and you may have never even really noticed these drop-down boxes. There's nothing to choose from because there's no other objects on this module. That's always going to say general there, and then this will just be your list of modules. There's no events here, and so yeah, you can't do an event object pair here because there's just nothing to choose from to do it. So it has to be on those special ones. Before I forget, I'm going to go disable the code on where was it? This workbook. Yeah, this cancel equals true. Let's get rid of that one, so that I'll be able to close eventually. Yeah, I mean, there's one that says save. When the user's getting ready to save this thing, you could actually just close the workbook and not save the changes. The very fact that they said change would dump everything they did. Don't spend a whole lot of time thinking about evil things, here, but yeah, okay. Not this one. I want to come back to my user form. Okay, so now let's get familiar with some of the other controls that we have to work with. So I'll come back to my form. I've got my OK button. Let's go ahead and put a cancel button on as well, and we can do that pretty quickly. I'm going to go ahead and copy the OK button, just Control-CV. And maybe I'll position these a little closer to where I'd like to have an OK and a cancel button. This one, now it's the copy is got a new name. I'll call it CMD cancel. I am going to come to the caption and change that to say cancel. So to clarify, you can't have spaces in the name, and the answer is correct. You cannot have spaces. The object names are tokens. They're VBA tokens. All VBA tokens that identify things in code have to start with a letter. And they can be any combination of letters, numbers, and the underscore character, but you've got to respect those rules. Okay, I'm now, the default property got selected on this one, so I'm going to turn that to false. And I'm going to choose the cancel property and make it true. So now I have a button that's my default button. User hits enter, it'll be like triggering that button. And I have a button that's a cancel button. What do you think triggers the cancel button? Yeah, escape. If you press escape, it'll be just like clicking the cancel button. Well, that's kind of nice. I don't have to write separate code to kind of handle those keystrokes. They're just kind of built into the environment. So let's go ahead and we'll put the same code behind the cancel button as we have the OK button for right now. They're both going to close the form. As we get to the point where they click OK, we'll have some more work to do because we'll be saving data there. Question? How did I get here? I just double-clicked on the cancel button. So I just double-clicked that button, and it came up and said, oh, you probably want to put some code on this object you clicked on. It's a command button, so you probably want the click object. It guessed the click event. It guessed the right one, and I just copied the unload me statement into it. But you see now why it's important that we name our objects, because these now become the names of our procedures. And I can't change these names. They have to be named after the object. And so now I'm looking at this and I get, okay, this is pretty good. When my cancel button gets clicked, when my OK button gets clicked, I can see what that code's doing. All right. Let's now take a look at a different kind of control. Let's do the capital A control. This is just the label. A label is static text. It's text the user can't change. You can change it programmatically, but the user can't change it. So, ultimately what I'd like to do is put all the data for one product sitting right here onto this form. And so here I've got this label. And I want this label just to identify what the data are, what data is right below it. And so I'm going to change the caption of this to be like product ID. Maybe I'll spell it all the way out, product. P-R-O-D-U-C-T. Now, you can't really see it very well here because the background of this label is the same color as the background of the form. But I could change that. Back color, I could make the back color red. And usually when you first, start making forms, you're like, woohoo, I'm going to make it, all these crazy colors. Generally speaking, that's a bad idea. You want the form to be as boring as possible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the back style from opaque to transparent. So even though there's a color on that, now the back's invisible. So now even if I was to change the color of the background of the form, I would still only see the letters here. There wouldn't be a different color behind the captions of my labels. Let's add another label here. In fact, I may just copy this label. And I want this one to be a little bit wider. This one is actually going to hold the product ID, the data that is the product ID. So I'll put that right in here. Now, I did not change the name of my first label because I'm not going to refer to it by code at all. So it's never going to show up in my code. It's not going to have the name of a subprocedure named after it. But this next one, I'm going to actually put a real product ID in there. So let me give it a name. I will call it LBL ID. And I'm going to configure this one to look a little bit more like a data field. So instead of being transparent, I'll put the background on this one back to opaque. And I'll put maybe just a little bit darker gray than normal. I'm on the palette, choices, a little bit darker gray, and I'll put a border on it as well. So border style will be single. That looks pretty good. And maybe I'll actually center it as well in there. So this control, I have to make sure I've got the control selected. It's got like a horizontal align or something. What is it called? Text align? Here it is. I'll change that to be centered. So now, that'll be the, right now it just says product ID, but when this form opens, I'm going to have code that pushes the actual relevant product ID into that little box. Let's do one more control, and then we'll actually code them to do something. So I'm going to copy my first label again, because I'll want this to just read the name. This is be the name of the product. Didn't mean to double click that. I meant to change the caption to be product name. And it looks like I got to make it a little bit wider. Okay. Now, but the product name is something, so the whole point, the reason I'm using a label for my product ID is because the label is static text. The user cannot change that. I don't want them fiddling with the product ID. You want to change the name? Okay. You want to change the price? Super. You want to change the manufacturer? Knock yourself out. But don't be changing the product ID. But if I want some text the user can change, that's the next control over. That's the text box. So I'll click and drag to bring in my product name. And I will give this a name. It's a text box, so it'll be txt name. And then there's no caption because this is one that we'll just be typing some data into. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and just show this so we can kind of see. Oops, it'll be on the form and play. So now those things are in it, but I want to make it so when this form first loads into memory, when it first gets shown, that we actually have the relevant data in here. And so we want to think about, where would I put that code? I want to make it when the user form opens. So think in terms of object and event. What object should I be looking for? Well, I got a list of objects to choose from right here. Which of all these objects do you think the one is? Well, right down here at the bottom, we have the UserForm object. And so this is events that are happening to the UserForm itself. Now, here, with that object selected, here are the relevant events. Look at all those events. How I wish there was one that said open. There's not. So I got to try to figure out, I wonder which one it is. What do you think? Activate's a pretty good choice. Maybe when this form becomes activated. Now, it turns out that with a form can be kind of in three different conditions, three different states. One is it's saved as a part of the workbook, but it's not loaded into memory. That's just the form is closed. It's then possible for that form to be elevated one level. That is, it's in memory. So, it's all of its objects are in memory. They all have properties. We've got all those captions are set up in memory, but it's not visible. And then it can go to be visible. And so the activate happens between when it's invisible but loaded into memory and when it becomes active, or when it actually gets shown. That would trigger the activate event. Now, even though we're going to be treating this as just like one form that's open at a time, it's possible to have two forms open at a time and go back and forth between them. In that case, when they become the active form, that activate event triggers as well. And so activate is tempting, but it's not the one I'm after. What are my other options? What else do you see up there that looks like it might be it? Initialize is the one. So initialize is the event that gets triggered when this thing comes out of being closed and comes up into memory for the first time. And so that's the code that I'm going to use. So we'll come here to initialize, and here's where we're going to write our code to actually show the data onto the form. Now, we are going to want to how do we know which sheet or which record we should show? How are we going to let the user choose which record they want to edit? Any thoughts? There's some way for the user to tell us, this is the record I want to edit. We could have them specify the product ID. So what does that mean? Put up a dialog box or something and type it in? Okay, so yeah, we could find it by the product ID. Just think about this. I mean, if you're using this, how would you like to, how you want to edit this record? How would you like to tell it the record that you really want to do? That's the one I'm on. It's like the active, this record, this one. My active cell is here. In fact, I think we made a procedure for this. Let's do this. I'm going to come back to my developer tab. I'm on my developer tab, my list of macros, and edit product. Did I assign a shortcut key to this already? Oh yeah, I did. So yeah, so here's the idea. I'm on this cell, I press Control-Shift-E, and it brings it up. I want to have the data that I'm currently looking at right there. Okay, so we're going to come back to our code, and we're going to let's see, it's created some other of these by mistake. I don't need those, I'll delete them. It's the initialize that I'm after. Okay, so I think what I'd like to have is I'd like to have a module level variable called row. So dim row as a long integer. And now when this gets initialized, I just want to record what my current row is. So here I'm going to say row is equal to my active cell dot row. So just whatever the row of the active cell is, that's what we want. But let's also make sure we're on the right worksheet. So this worksheet I think is called data. Yeah, it says products on the tab of the worksheet, but the actual code name for the worksheet is data. So I'm going to say data.activate. So when this form comes into memory, I'm going to say activate the worksheet that's relevant for this form, and then remember what that row is. And now I could actually right here and initialize, but this initialize is going to get really long. I'd rather have kind of a separate procedure that's just kind of set up to show my data. And I can write general sub-procedures on this module just like I can in a general module. So maybe I'll come just right here before initialize, and I'll create another sub-procedure called show data. And so inside of show data, I just want to start putting data into these forms. Well, one of these forms was called LBL-ID, or one of these controls is called LBL-ID. Now, if I remember, I can just type it in, LBL-ID dot, but once you get dozens of controls on this form, it's tough to remember. What did I call that and whatever? So here's a neat little trick. If I say me, ME, that's a reference to this form, and then I say dot, IntelliSense is going to say, oh, here's everything that belongs to this form, including the controls you've added. So if I see me, LBL, it's going to show me all my labels right there together. And I go, oh yeah, it's called LBL ID. And I can leave the me on there, or I can take it off. It's fine either way. So now I'm going to say the caption of that control is going to equal something different. Well, my worksheet is called data, so data.cells, row number, row, column number 1, I think is where the ID is, dot value. I am reading off of a particular row, I'm reading out the value of column 1, and I'm putting it into the caption property of that label. Same thing here, me.txt, name, that's what I called it. Now, sadly, there's no caption property. But there's a value property, and there's also a text property. The difference between value and text are really, really slight. Either one will work for what we're after right here. But I'm going to go ahead and bring that, and I think the name is in column F. We'll find out shortly. I'll run that, and oh, I made the sub-procedure, but I never called it. So show data needs to be called for my initialize. Saddleback. I don't know if that's really the name. Is that the name? Oh yeah, it is. That's a funny name, but there it is. I don't know what Saddleback is, but that's a product. So we're feeling pretty good about it. So we've got a sub-procedure called show data that the only thing it does is push data from the worksheet up onto the user form, and we're calling it when we initialize. Initialize is then saying make sure the right sheet is active, read the row that we're interested in. Oh, you know what? Let's do another little trick right here. Let's do this. What happens if row is 1? What does it mean if row is equal to 1 at this point? What's a little bit unpleasant about row number 1? It's the headers. I'm not sure I want the user editing my headers. I mean, they could just by editing the cell, but that's not what this thing is meant for. It's actually meant for it changing the data. And so what can we do? If row is 1, then what? Okay, so we could exit out of the sub procedure. I like something better. I mean, after all, they went through all the work to say open the form. It'd be kind of rude. Open the form, no. Open the form, no. Edna's going to love us, even more with that kind of code. What's another option? Yeah, let's just make it 2. Then row equals 2. And so now if I'm up here on row 1 and Control-Shift-E, I'm going to get the data for row number 2. The custom brass banded spec clear, whatever that is. Questions? Yep. Okay, so let's make sure that I did it kind of quickly, but make sure that you declared a module level variable for the row. Did you create that variable? Okay, yeah. Fortunately, we had option explicit. So with option explicit set, you tried to refer to a variable that wasn't yet declared, and it said, hey, slow down, something's wrong here. You got to declare that variable first. Okay, let's do a little in-class example. I'm going to give you 4 minutes to see how far you can do on this. I want you to add price. So it's more of the same, but just give us a, oh, you know what? I want to do one more thing before we get to price. So I want to make it so we can actually save these things. So here, when the user clicks OK, I'm going to get our little joke here out of the way. I'm going to move this one all the way to the end of my module, because it's really not useful for the rest of this example. Okay, so now the user can actually change the name. I'd like to write that name back to the worksheet. Well, watch this. I'm just going to take this statement, which reads the data from the worksheet and puts it into the form, and I am going to just reverse it. I'm going to read the data from the form and put it back into the worksheet. I just reverse the order of that line. And only when they click OK, if they click cancel, we're not writing anything back to the worksheet, but if they click OK, we will. Very important to put it before the unload me. If you say unload me, what does it do? Yeah, it drops the whole form out of memory. What's going to happen to the line that comes after unload me? Gone. Yeah, it won't execute at all, so it's got to come before the unload me. All right, so now in class exercise, 4 minutes, I want you to add the price. Put the price right up in here. Got a great 4-minute timer. So we've set up 2 objects, the label and the price, or the label and the text box. We've given them a reasonable name, so this is called txt price. So when we are loading the data, we are reading out of column E and writing it into our txt price control. And then when we're saving the data, it's going just in opposite. I don't think we've actually ever tested this, but I think it works pretty well. Here I've got the custom brass banded spec clear. I'm going to make it shaded, or S-H-A-D-E-D. And so we should see when I hit OK that this word clear changes to shaded right there. Control-Shift-E, change the price. What's with the $69.99? I'm just going to go a regular old $70. And now we're saving that out as well. Okay, how many of you felt like I either got that to work or I was on the right path and would have got it with just a little bit more time? Okay, anyone here who's going, wow, this stuff is just magical to me and I'm still not quite sure where to go? Anyone there? So a few of you there. All right, well, it's day 1. Good news is we got 2 days that you can feel confused about it. But we'll try to hopefully bring us along on this. Okay, so looks like we got time probably for one more thing. So let's look at this. We have other kinds of controls, and that's the whole idea here, is that we've got different kinds of controls. Now, as it turns out, we have, what do we have? we have only a few departments. In fact, if we look at our lists, there are only 4 different departments: hunting, outdoor, general, and apparel. And so we'd like to see another way to pick that list. Instead of having the user type that in, we want us to be able to pick it from a list. And we have several options to be able to pick from a list. And this will show that we have a little more flexibility than we have even with something like data validation. And so here, we are going to bring in this next control right here. It's called a frame. So I'm going to go ahead and bring a frame in. It's going to be kind of big enough to hold 4 different options. Be about that big. You're familiar with the term radio button. I don't know if you've heard this term at all, but back in the day when you used to have a radio that you listened to when you drove around in your car, like 5 buttons on it, and you could pre-program each one to be a different radio station. You push one, and it would turn on that radio station. And when you pushed another one, it turned on a different radio station, right? You could only have one station selected at a time. So that's the idea behind radio buttons. In VBA, they're called option buttons. I'll have a set of option buttons, and then by selecting one, it will unselect the other one that was selected just before that. And so if I don't put them inside of a frame, then I will have one set of option buttons across my whole form. But if I want to have, one set here, another set here, another set here, then they will become kind of individual sets by the fact that they're in a frame. So I'm going to call this frame, what is it called? Department. I'm not going to refer to the frame through code, so I won't worry about the name, but I will change the caption to say department. And now I'm going to put option buttons into this frame. So here's the option button. Looks like a little target. I'm going to draw one of these right inside my department. I'm going to make sure that it is wholly within the frame. And then maybe I'll just copy that one so that I've got 4 in total. Okay, now I'm going to configure these so that they're the names of my 4 departments. So I'm going to do both names and captions here. So this first one, I'll call OPT hunting, and the caption will be hunting. So in this case, the caption is just the word that's showing next to the button, next to the little selector. I've got another one that's apparel, OPTAPPAREL, and caption will be apparel. Yeah, so the question is, so when I'm referring to this thing through code, do I do the caption or the name? The answer is the name. So that it's like a variable name that goes directly to this object. This is, what do we have? We have hunting, apparel, outdoor, and general. So OPT outdoor. Caption is outdoor. And then general. Okay, now this now is going to be a little bit more difficult because it's not just a matter of reading the cell and dropping it into the control because there's no place to drop the words. The words are pre-spelled. We've got to look at what value is in the cell of the current row and figure out which one of these to select. So let's go ahead and look at our code. Just a little bit off. I guess we'll leave them for now. All right, so when I show the data, I'm going to have like a select case statement here. First of all, where's the category? I think it's in column 2, is that right? Yeah, it's in column 2. Oh, thank you. Yeah, it is. So we're on column 3. So select case, and then I'm looking at column 3. Now, The truth is, I don't really care if this is uppercase or lowercase. So I'm going to do, it's kind of unfortunate that the word case is used here twice. It's totally different context. Lowercase version of column C on my current row. And select. And then I'll have a case statement in here. So if the lowercase version of whatever is in column C of the current row is hunting, then, and we usually normally put this onto on a second line if I've got multiple lines, but here, because I'm just going to do one line for each case, I'm going to do it on the same line. It'll make my code a little bit more readable. I'll put a colon in there, which lets me put two statements on the same line of code. And I'm just going to say the name of my control, which is OPT hunting, dot value equals true. So option buttons have a value property. It's true or false. If it's selected, it's true. If it's not selected, it's false. And by setting it to true, then it will actually select it. So I've got hunting, I've got outdoor, I've got apparel, oops, that's the lowercase, and then I've got general. And let's put a case else in here as well. What happens if it's not any of those? What does it mean? It's some kind of error. Unexpected department. Or bad department. You know, someone could have changed the data in that cell, and when I read it, that's going to be a problem. Okay. Last thing then for today, let's just make sure that that works. Let me come back here, and we're on hunting, Control-Shift-E. Yeah, hunting is selected. That looks wonderful. Come down a little bit. Here's outdoor. Getting outdoor. Here's general. Great if I hit Control-Shift-E. There we go. We got general. And then just one more. Are we hitting apparel? Hitting apparel. Great. So we've got them all. They're all selecting properly. Now we just have to have the flip side. If we've selected something different, what are we going to show? So this will be the last thing we cover for today. But here on when we're saving the data, now this will be an if statement because we use a select case made sense for reading the data because we're looking at a single cell. But now we've got to look at each one of the different option buttons individually. So if OPT hunting equals true, or dot value equals true, but of course it is itself either true or false, so I don't have to say true equals true because it would just be true equals true, which is also true, but that works by itself. Then we'll do something. What do we want to do? We want to set that column on the current cell equal to hunting. Else, if, so we'll have hunting, outdoor, and apparel. But if it's not hunting, outdoor, or apparel, we'll just have an else for that clause, and it's got to be general. Outdoor, apparel. And now that should correctly write out the values when we save. Whew. So it's a little bit of work to be able to get these forms to do what we want them to do. Let me just check and make sure that that works at least once. I've got apparel here. I'm going to change that to hunting. Say OK. Yeah, and let's move that to hunting, so that looks great. So now we're correctly reading, we're correctly writing. that's a good start for forms. We'll pick up here when we get back together again on next Monday. Have a good weekend. Class dismissed. Yeah.
The computer that I have here does not work unless I'm connected to a charger. I just wanted to well, it's still recording, I guess.
Oh yeah. Yeah.